Welcome to Los Angeles Data Platform User Group. Good time of the day, everyone. Whenever you are, please drop your city and country into the chat so we know which communities we're serving. Again, welcome to Los Angeles Data Platform User Group. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Steve, and I'll be the moderator of this virtual meeting. I'll be joined by Yelena. If this is your first time joining, we actually abandoning Eventbrite, and we're going to be exclusively on Meetup. So here's the link for Meetup. You can also send us an email as well. If you are attending us for the first time and would like to follow us, here's all the social media links that you can use. We're posting recorded videos and also any news and also newsletter as well, which that's actually the mailing list. This is how you can get into the weekly newsletter. So you can scan the QR code, you can click on URL. And upcoming SQL Server events, we have an event in a week or so in Orange County. The hyperlinks, you can click on those. And almost close for the June 1st for SQL Server in Los Angeles. And this event is sponsored by Microsoft Team Tree and Data Driven Technologies. Data Driven Technologies, or short DDT, is the nonprofit that funds this user group as well as SQL Server in Los Angeles, Orange County, and Silicon Valley, probably San Diego at some point as well. Microsoft, everyone knows, for the public and cloud and various tools like Windows OS and SQL Server. And Team Tree is a virtualized storage company. Okay. Next presentation is Ginger Graham with data engineering in Microsoft Fabric. And without further ado, let's move to the rock star of today's online meeting. Ginger, please take it away and introduce yourself.
All right. Thank you very much. I will grab it for real this time. Thank you very much, Steve, for letting me follow Paresh. Hopefully you can all see my screen now. All right, so I'm going to be talking about data engineering in Microsoft Fabric. I know that probably many of you, if you haven't started playing with Fabric, you may have seen a lot of news that has come out about it since Microsoft just had a conference about it. There's been a lot of news dropping as a result, and even some really cool stuff that I want to mention in my presentation that happened today. So latest and greatest cool stuff. Can't wait to play around with it. All right, a little bit about me. My name is Ginger Grant. I am a Microsoft Data Platform MVP and a Microsoft Certified Trainer. I have my own data consultancy, and I also have a couple of classes out on LinkedIn, including one on Fabric, in case you are interested. I have a link that I'm going to share out at the end. I've got a class that for some period of time, I can't remember how LinkedIn works, you can take it for free. So free is always good. So I'll share that at the end. All right, so what is data engineering anyway? Well, basically it's another way to say extract, transfer, and load, because that's really what you're doing when you're doing data engineering. But you might not be doing it that way. You might just be copying it over and then manipulating it and then joining it together with other stuff. There could be a number of different tools that you're using for this as well. You could be using Python, you could be using ADF, you could be using Data Wrangler. You've got a lot of different options for ways that you can do data engineering. And basically all you want to do when you're doing this is get data from different data sources and then of course combine it together into one place. That task is still the same. So let's look at some ways that you might be familiar with that you can do. One of the things about Fabric is Microsoft really threw just about every data tool on the planet inside of it. So ADF, yeah, that's outside and inside Fabric. Data Warehouse, yep, that's inside Fabric too. Spark, yep, that's there too. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to transform your data. And the idea was that Microsoft wanted one place that you need to go so you don't have to wander all over Azure to get resources that you need to modify your data. ADF was released some time ago. The implementation in Fabric is pretty much the same as it was if you use traditional ADF, and I do mean Azure Data Factory. I suppose I should have written that out. It's an integration tool that was created to be the online version of SSIS. With it, you can use it to create data pipelines to transform your data at a specified time. Traditionally, that's been done by data flows. That's one way of doing it. Everything that you can do in ADF in the outside of Fabric, you will soon, if you can't yet, do it inside of Fabric. The only thing that I know inside of Fabric that is not included right now is lift and shift SSIS. The data gateways just got to be working. And one thing about ADF, if you don't really know much about it, there's a lot of wizards that you can use to get started. So you can kind of like pump along until you've got things down and really learn how to do it. You can be successful without knowing a whole lot by using the wizards. So Fabric also contains some other items that you could use as well. So inside of Fabric, you can create notebooks. And notebooks is a fancy way of using Spark. Now a lot of people think, learn another language. Well, you don't really have to, because with Spark, it also uses T-SQL. And to be honest, most of the Spark that I write is ANSI SQL, because that's what you use inside of Spark. And I do that not because I don't know how to write Python, but because I work for people and I want to leave and I don't want to do maintenance. So if I write everything in SQL, they're happy about the fact that they can make that work themselves. Another thing that Fabric added inside of ADF that is not on the outside of Fabric version is something called Dataflow Gen 2. And Dataflow Gen 2 is really just Power BI. So Power BI is the Power Query part of it has been implemented for Dataflows Gen 2. So if you're like, well, I don't know ADF, and I don't know notebooks, but I can do Power Query, you can transform data inside of Fabric. There are also a number of wizards that Fabric has to get started on transforming data as well. You can do anything inside of ADF, and it includes a couple of new data sources that you might find useful as well. So we'll dive deeper into those. So I'm talking to more and more clients, and they are looking to transform data using notebooks more than any other tool. And the reason why is that they like notebooks is they're not really tied to any technology, because if they get mad at Microsoft, they can do the whole thing in Databricks if they feel like it, because again, that's running Spark too. And you can move your stuff to, AWS with Databricks as well. It's just Spark. But the other thing, if you're not interested in that, one of the things is it can be easier to read and document because notebooks include comments and samples of code. It can handle larger data sets than any of the other methods can. One of the things about data flows is they do have an upper limit for how much data. Now, generally speaking, it's like half a terabyte. They start to die, and you may not deal with data that large, so you may not be concerned about it. But notebooks don't really have an upper limit. If your notebook is running slowly, you can increase the size of the compute that it's running on and make it perform better. But one thing that's nice about using a notebook is if somebody changed it, it's real easy to see what they did. Of course, Microsoft has added source control to ADF, but with ADF, it's kind of difficult to see what was changed, and there's no real good way to comment what has changed, and that's not the case with any kind of a notebook. You can also create templates and use those templates for your developments so that it's not as hard. You don't have to necessarily do everything from scratch. So some of the things that people do think it can be harder to understand. You can write bad code, and there are people who do. It does require some Spark and Python knowledge, but then again, we have Copilot now, so it's not as difficult to learn as it once was. And it can be slower to create because there is more typing involved. It's not drag and drop, it's you writing the code. So some things to think about, but I see more and more people moving this way towards transforming in notebooks, more so than the tools, just so that they have options for scalability and reusability of the code. So the keys to writing good data transformation code is basically implement design standards in your organization so that everybody's doing things kind of the same way, and it makes it easier to read. And with notebooks of course include Markdown, and you can include comments and documentation, and you should. Now, one thing that I wanted to bring up when it comes to writing comments and documentation is today, this is cutting edge, breaking knowledge, Microsoft released a blog post that they are allowing you to incorporate Copilot in every type of Fabric capacity, which is great because before you had to give Microsoft $5,000 a month before today to be able to use Copilot, and now you don't. And one of the things that Copilot is really good at is creating comments and documentation. Now you do need to review them to make sure that they are correct, but they are really good at writing that. They are also really good at writing error handling. So you can have it write your error handling for you. So one of the things that you also need to remember when you are writing any kind of transformational code is remember code for the fact that someday this might crash, and how are you going to handle it if it crashes in the middle? How are you going to dump out of the data that you are using now so that you can restart it without it being a giant pain? So make sure you include that in any design standards that you're creating for data engineering. Now, in addition to like standard notebooks, which we will of course take a look at, I also wanted to talk about a feature that is included inside of Fabric called Data Wrangler. And Data Wrangler is basically using, it's not Copilot because it's more like Power Query that writes Spark code. So it writes code for you to do common tasks and operations for cleaning and fixing your data. And so you can choose an operation to get started. Notice on the left, there's some formatting, numeric schemas, that sort of thing. And you can create whatever steps that you'd like. And once you exit out of Data Wrangler, what it's going to do is then transform that code from pandas, which is what it writes inside of Data Wrangler, into standard PySpark using data flows in a notebook. And the reason that matters is because pandas are not Spark compliant, so you don't want to use them in Spark code. Now, if you don't have giant amounts of data, you could argue, and I talked to somebody at Microsoft who did make that argument, that doesn't really matter because unless you have a lot of data, you can get away with pandas, but it's best to be Spark compliant in the hopes that someday your data gets really, really large and you'll need it. So you can use these different auto build methods for analysis. So again, remember that you don't want to do a save it in pandas. That is an option. And Spark doesn't scale pandas data frames. I actually had a client that brought me in because they were doing some stuff in Spark and they moved it to Synapse. This was a while ago. And they're like, it doesn't matter what compute we put on this, it doesn't go any faster. Well, that was because they did not rewrite their code for Spark, and it was just in Python, it used pandas. And Spark doesn't know what to do with that, so it doesn't move it into its different nodes. It's not multi-processing. So let's take a look at different kinds of notebook transformations that I can do inside of Spark. Now, if any of you are familiar with what you have with Synapse, know that yes, a lot of this is the exact same stuff, but of course, a little bit different when it comes to Spark. Now, let me review a little bit about, before I get into data wrangling, a little bit about just the environment in general. Because one of the things that's really confusing is Microsoft landed all of Fabric inside of Power BI. And I know people were like, well, I got Power BI, do I have Spark? Well, if you're wondering, there's a couple ways of finding out. One of them, and you will need to do this, and I also wanted to show you something new that was added. If you have users can create Fabric items enabled, that means you have Fabric. The other thing that was announced today that you want to do is you want to make sure, because it's brand new, is you want to make sure that this is enabled. And this was added today. And this will allow you to access the Copilot features. So if somebody, by default, this is going to be turned on starting in May, but it's not, this is not May, obviously. This is April, so you want to make sure that it is turned on. And also make sure that you have the right geographic region set up. So if you want to, again, this note is for generally GDPR, and you can turn this off if you need to be GDPR compliant. So if you're like, that's great that you're showing me all this admin stuff, but I don't have admin rights, how else would I find out whether or not I've got the Fabric components turned on? Well, another easy way to do it is basically click on this Power BI icon. I was really shocked when I was at somebody's site earlier, and it will say Microsoft Fabric. But if you don't have Fabric capacity turned on, you don't see data warehouse. You'll see data engineering and data science, but you won't see data warehouse. I get that makes no sense. Data activator is an option, so you may or may not have that turned on. But that's another way to find out if you have Fabric capacity or not. You can see I've got a trial, which is kind of a giveaway, but that's not, of course, the only way to use Fabric. You could be using your existing Power BI capacities and not have to have a trial to be able to access Fabric features. All right, so let's get into looking at workspaces, because there's also something that I wanted to bring up regarding Fabric. Fabric does use quite a bit of compute. So in order to use any Fabric features, your workspace must be set to have extra capacity, or have capacity settings. So that, of course, is what these little diamonds are for. And this indicates that I have added capacity to my workspaces so that I can use Fabric elements. So the only ones I haven't are the ones that are created for reporting, which I should probably create a new one that doesn't have any capacity. Then I wouldn't be able to do Fabric. So that is what it gives you. The other thing, unfortunately, is you do need to have capacity to be able to do source control, which I think is criminal. But you have to have that for source control to be enabled, which is unfortunate. So I'm going to go inside of my Fabric capacity, and we can see I've got a number of different items listed in here. Right now, I'm just filtering on notebooks, which I can do. The other thing that I also wanted to do, and I haven't done this yet, but 2 weeks ago, the ability to add folders was created. So I'm going to do that to make this a little bit less messy. But it wasn't available until 2 weeks ago, and I haven't gone through and cleaned my stuff up. Bad me. So I'm going to go into data wrangling and kind of show you how that works. So you can see that this is a notebook. And we can see that in my notebook, I have a data source that is associated with it. So this is I'm going to do what I call the cooking school version of a data wrangler, and this is where we're going to end up, and I'm going to show you what we need to do to get this happen. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new notebook inside of my Fabric capacity, and more options, and I want to create a new notebook. Now, there are some misconceptions about where you have to do this. Notice here, I'm in Power BI. I'm not in data engineering. I could be in data engineering, and then it would be easier for me to find notebooks, but it doesn't really matter. So I think this is the one I just created. Yep. So I don't have, I'll just do a brand new one. Let me delete this one. Delete this one. And just start all over again. So once again, I am going to filter this so that I only see I wanted to see my notebooks, but I'll just do that later. So let's get out of this one and I'll just do a brand new one. All right, so new notebook. So now I can see my new notebook. This slightly changed because I switched to data engineering. So click create my new notebook. And in my new notebook, I've got no resources and no lakehouses. To be able to do data wrangling, I'm going to need to have a lakehouse. And a lakehouse is a fancy way of saying that I need a data source, because if I don't have a data source, I can't wrangle a data source. So I'm going to select for my list of data sources and my list of lakehouses. And I could either create a new one or I could do an existing one. So I'm going to add an existing lakehouse. And I'm just going to use my public holiday sample, which is inside of this workspace. I'm going to go ahead and add that. So now I've got a lake house that's got public holidays loaded in that. And so what I can do with that is I can just drag that over here, and it wrote some Spark code for me, so that just doing a simple select statement, and it's going to create a data frame. So I can go ahead and run this, and we can see what our data looks like and then see what we probably want to do to wrangle it. So the session started. Now it's just running this particular cell. If any of you have ever used Synapse, this is like such a great feature because it used to take 4 minutes to run anything. It was so annoying. This is going to show us the data here in a minute. So we can see that we've got a number of holidays and a number of countries. We can see if it's got paid time off or not. And we can see it, of course, for different countries and different years. So what I'm going to do now is I've got my data up here. So I am going to go to Data Wrangler. So just selecting my options here to transform my data from what I've got now. So I have to have also a data frame. And I created one here by just dragging it over. So it's like, hey, you've got a data frame, and that's what we need to use Data Wrangler. So just select from a table, and you can go ahead and do that. So it's going to go ahead and start Data Wrangler, and then I'm going to see all the different options that I have available to me for my data. So this is just how we can do different kinds of analysis. I don't have to do any work. So it shows me that I don't have any missing countries. I've got an index here. I've got no missing holiday names. I've got 173 distinct values. Normalize, again, I've got 172 distinct values. For paid time off, I've got true of 6%. I've got a country region code, and I don't have anything missing there, which is good. And then I have the date. So I've got this different elements listed here. So if we look at my different things that I can see here, I could, if I had missing values, I could fill them. And I could do a find and replace. And capitalize the first character, convert to uppercase, strip white space if I wanted to. Oops. I can do different formulas. Different numeric elements to this. And then I can change the column type, and I can do sort and filtering for this as well. And the last one is I can do, and this is something that I can do, is new column by example. For those of you who've ever played around with that in Power BI, it's very similar, but I want to do something even more specific because I want to do date time formatting by example, because I don't care about the time, and because I'm looking at what day is a holiday. So this date format, this doesn't work for me. So I'm going to select that I want to do a date time format by example. And notice that this is just like Power Query. So I've got my cleaning steps down here. So it's going to say, all right, so what's your target column? Which column is messed up? And that would be my date column. And for the column name, I'm just going to say that I want to call this holiday. This will be my new derived column. So I'm going to go over here, and now I can see my new holiday item here. Make this a little bit smaller. So this is where I'm going to do column by example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my format too, because see here it is, and I want to make sure that it is year, month, day, and it is. I don't want to get that wrong, and I can't tell from 1/1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter the date how I want it, and then have it fix it. So I'm going to say that I want my month, my day, and then my year. And I'm also going to make sure that I do that for my 12/31, so it knows that to get that right. So it may not get it right unless I fix that now. And looks like it did. So I entered that one entry and said, hey, do this by example. And I have an example of how I want the date to be. And we can see here that it's done it correctly for year, month, day when it's something larger. So obviously all I had to do was that, and it transformed it. Now, what it shows me here is it shows me, if this is good, which it obviously is, it shows me the code here in Pandas of the code that it wrote. And that's exactly what I want. I'm wanted to do that. The other thing that I want to do here for missing values is I want to go back to all operations. I have true, but for missing values, I have false. So what I want to do instead is I want to do a find and replace. I want to do it on this column. So I'm going to select my is paid time off. Oh, come on. So I want to replace the old with a new, and it's not letting me do that. I don't know what's up with that. If I highlight it better, I can do it this way. I could fill the missing values, and that'll probably be a better way of doing it. Not letting me. Weird. Let's see if I don't have it selected before me. Well, last time I did this, that worked. So we're just going to have to do something else for that one, since that's not what I want to do. So weird. So now that I've got my date fixed and I've applied it, then I'm going to go and say that I want to, I could create a view if I want, look at the different operations. I'm going to go back to all operations, and I'm going to exit out of Data Wrangler. And it tells me here that your Spark data frame has been converted into Pandas sample, but all the code was going to be converted to PySpark when you add it to your notebook. Well, I'm going to go add it to my notebook. So I'm going to go back. Oh, shoot, shouldn't have done that. Sorry. Go back. I screwed up, so I'm going to have to do this again. That's okay. Because I forgot to click on Add Code to Notebook. I'm getting too excited. This time I will remember to click this button before I hit this one, and it'll be fine. And unfortunately, I still have to wait for it again. All right, I'm going to go back to doing this. Highlight my date field, say that I want to look for my date and time formatting by example. My target column is going to be date. My derived column is going to be holiday. And I'm going to enter my example again. And I'm going to enter it down, and I didn't even have to do it. It automatically filled it. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to apply. And now I can add the code to Notebook, which is what I should have done as well. And it's here, it shows me the code that it wrote. So it's going to show me this code. And I'm going to go ahead and add that. And I will say that I know that this code has an error. Microsoft promised that they would fix me, but they haven't yet. So I can go ahead and run this now. And it's going to then display my data as clean data. And now we can see that I've got this new holiday column as well. So one thing I might want to do after this is I'm going to go back to Data Wrangler. I should have done this earlier, so I'm just going to show it to you in another step. I'm going to take my DF clean, the one with the modified data. And I don't need to do it this way. I'm just doing this for example. And I'm going to delete this column because I don't need it. So I've just clicked on the ellipse. And for those of you who haven't worked with Microsoft for very long, remember that Microsoft hides all the cool stuff in the ellipse. So I'm going to go ahead and say drop columns. I want this to drop. I don't want this. And here's the code. I'm going to go ahead and say apply. And then I'm going to add this code to my notebook. And it's going to show me what it did. I don't want the pandas code. I just want the Spark. So I'm going to go ahead and say add. So if we scroll down, we can get it to drop that code. So pretty good PySpark for somebody if you haven't ever written any before. You've done some various manipulations of your data without having to do any work. And you can see how to write it if that's what you're looking to do as well. So this is a great way to do lots of different kinds of data transformations using Spark. And once you have a notebook, you can include a notebook in a pipeline that you might create. So going into data engineering, and then I'm just going to go here, and I can create a data pipeline and make a new pipeline. And if I want that to run periodically to clean up my data, I can basically play around with it. And I also wanted to show you this because I told you that there were a lot of different kinds of learning tools here. So you can learn how to do it with some guidance, showing you how to copy data, practice with sample data, and then use templates. Now, templates are really cool because these are something that Microsoft just created a little while ago for steps that people generally do when they're doing a pipeline. So I'm going to select a template, and here's some options. And so let's say that I want to copy data into a lakehouse, for example. If that's what I want to do first, I'm going to go ahead and say next. And it can create that template to me. It can pull my ADLS connection that I happen to have. And it can copy it to an existing lakehouse that I have, or I can use a new one. And then I can say, use this template. So basically, it's telling me that it has created everything that I need, except for what the source is. So it's telling me just change the green stuff, and you've got a pipeline created to do what you need it to do. So kind of a really good way of getting started. Of course, I can also, in my pipeline, say I've copied my data. I can go ahead and take my notebook, and I wanted to do this to be data wrangling. And what I can do here is I can basically say which workspace that my notebook is in, and then of course I can pick it. So then I can just start stringing my stuff through in my different notebooks, going from copying data to data wrangling to any other step that I might want to create. So this is be your, I will say that copying data is one thing that I tend to use the copy command for, because Microsoft has optimized it, and there's no faster way of, say, getting data from Salesforce than using the copy command. And then after that, probably wrangle the data into something else that is more, it has a better form. But any question, there are some new templates that Microsoft is going to be creating, and those will contain like blank steps. So the template will say, first you want to copy it, then you want to do this, and then you want to do that, and they'll have little blanks, and you can fill that just so that you know what steps you need to complete, which is something that is going to be coming very soon. So I've got my data coming in, and then I'm going to go ahead and wrangle it as part of my nightly process. And of course, if it dies, I can make, schedule it, schedule when I want it to run, and then looking at, of course, I could do everything that I could do previously with setting different kinds of alerts, etc. All right, any questions about that? Kind of a cool way of teaching yourself some Python as well. All right, so data flow Gen 2. So this is another really cool low-code way of manipulating your data and doing some data engineering that wasn't possible before there was Power BI. So what you're doing with the data flow is you are doing basically Power Query. And then you can export it to Power BI, or you can export your data to the Lakehouse after you've got that completed. So let's take a look at what it takes to create a data flow inside of Fabric. Now again, we'll do the whole cooking school thing. So we want to filter by my data flows, so I can just find these. So let's take a look at some ones that I've created, and then we can kind of go from there. So if I've got different data, I can select my data flow and take a look at where I had it do here. So more ways of manipulating data. So I have a CSV as my source file that I have selected here. And then it came in just like you might expect a CSV file that would come in. It had the headers in the first row. So I'm going to use first row as headers. And then after this, I wanted to change my data types, since it had line item total as text and order quantity as text. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. So line item total is in decimal, order quantity is numeric, and so is product ID and line item and customer ID, and set up order dates as well. And then I can do a little bit of renaming. And what's really the only thing that I don't like about this, because it's kind of weird, is that you have to publish everything. And once you're in here, you have to actually click on the X to get out of it. And I can say, where do you want this to go? So I can choose to put this to a lakehouse or to a table. So once I have it in a lakehouse, then I can take a look at it there. So I'm just going to go ahead and publish it. Now, one of the things about having a lakehouse inside of Fabric, the other way that you can take a look at your data, in addition to some of the tools that I showed you here, is I can actually just pull this up inside of SQL Server. So I just pull up SQL Server, and let me show you how I can do that. So I'm going to change my filter from data flows to a lakehouse, and we can take a look at how I can, lakehouse, and I want endpoints. I want both of these. All right, so here we can see that I have a lakehouse, and most of my lakehouse contain two things. They contain a semantic model and a SQL Analytics endpoint. Now, a semantic model is everything that you need to connect to Power BI. So I can connect to Power BI to any of these semantic models that I see here and write reports off of them. And anything with an endpoint, what I can do, and the lakehouses is house, the water next to it. It's funny, I was telling my dad about it. He's like, you're doing things with ponds? I'm like, lakes. Lakes? Ponds? I'm like, yeah, no, just forget it, Dad. So if I want to take a look at it in my endpoint, like at World War I here, for example, I can take a look at it here as if it was inside of SQL. So I can run any kind of SQL that I want inside and run that. But if I don't particularly like the way that I don't like this tool and I want to use it the same way that I always do and use SQL Server to do it, what I can then do is just connect to my my Lakehouse inside of Management Studio. And to do that, all I need to do is find out what my Lakehouse, my endpoint is, and then do that. So again, you can look at your data, you can look at the model, and you can look at the query. Take a look at settings. This is where I see my SQL connection string. So I'm going to copy this. And now that I've got SQL Server loaded, I can just paste that inside of my Management Studio. Log in. I bet you I have to do two-factor on this. Yep. And I can see all of my databases, not just the one, which always strikes me as weird. So I can see everything that I have access to. So inside of World War I, now I can access the data that I created in Fabric and do everything I want to inside of Management Studio. Now I say everything that I want. This is still file-based because the Lakehouse is based on Parquet files. So I can't create tables with this, but I can do stored procedures, views, and I can do data masking if I want to. So I can access my data and write some views or whatever I want to inside of Management Studio. I don't have to be stuck using the editor if I don't want to. And I can also implement, different kinds of user level security that you might want to have for any database and just do it inside of here, which is a much better place than trying to do it. I could do it inside of the Fabric environment, but hey, I've used this tool for much longer, so I know how it works, and so I find this more comfortable for me to use. So, of course, you can always look at Azure Data Explorer the same way that you can look at it inside of Management Studio. So I can play around with my data, and I can manipulate it in there as well. So, maybe create a view, put that view, and write that inside of Spark later on inside of a notebook. All right, so we looked at Dataflow Gen 2s. So one of the things that's really cool about data engineering is pipelines have more flexibility. I can choose to schedule a notebook if I want to, but I generally don't because it doesn't have all of the features that I get with a pipeline. I will do the copy commands and data flows because, like I said, those are really, really fast. And I can migrate data flows to Fabric notebooks, and by putting the data to Lakehouse, then manipulate them from there. And if I have Power BI existing data flow, I can just export that and import that into a Dataflow Gen 2. So if I've got existing code, I can do that. There is a command line tool to convert ADF to Spark. And that is something that was created with GitHub, and it uses a Dataflow REST API. So if you want to convert your ADF to Spark, you can do that. It's limited to like source and column mapping, join and filtering and kind of flattening out. Microsoft is committed to creating a tool to take data from ADF and convert that to Spark. It's not out yet. Right now, you have to do it using the REST API, but you can migrate using that. If you want to map from a data flow to a Gen 2 data flow, you can export any kind of queries from ADF as a PQT file, import them into Fabric, and save, and you're ready to go. So you can move things that way. So just showing you how you can convert ADF mappings to data flows. So if I go into my environment here, and let's say that if I go back into Azure, and inside of Azure, I take a look inside of my Synapse workspace, where I believe I've got some ADF that I can use as well. And choose to export this as PTQ and read it back in. Oops. Outside that. Nothing's easy. All right, let me change the password. Stop. I really want to log in that badly anyway. All right. Taking a look at my, I don't have to have it in here. I'll show you how to do it, even though I won't be able to do it because it's in a different tenant. So let me pull up that other tenant to show you where you can do this. So if we go into inside of Synapse, I actually should still be able to do this. Go into Synapse Studio. See if it makes you do two-factor authentication. Now this isn't that special, but I can export this as a template and say save as, and export this here. Open up the file. Yeah, and I can import this. So that would be another way that I could do that. So with that, that wasn't that great of a demo because I can't do it from different tenants, and I accidentally blew away my sample there. So one of the things about everything with Fabric is things are changing pretty quickly, but you can still use what you know. You can do a lot with SQL. You do need to learn some new tools though, and there's a bunch of different ways to do that. So a couple of the ways that you can learn to do new tools is Microsoft has got all sorts of resources to help you out with that. And I'm going to go ahead and paste these inside of chat here. So that you have all of these different resources. Microsoft is I can't believe actually how much effort that they have done with this, with the different resources they've created. And one of the things that they're pushing people to do is take the certification exam. And while I'm not, a certification exam is what it is, but you might find it helpful because you learn things doing it. And there's a number of different learning challenges involved with that too that you might want to get involved with. And the last link is one that I created. I'm not sure how long it lasts, but I created a LinkedIn course on doing data transformations in Fabric. And with that link, you can access it for free for, I don't know, I think it's a week, some period of time that I can't figure out because it's always free for me. So I didn't really test it. But that link does work. I did test that much of it. So you can learn more about Fabric in that LinkedIn Learning class. So with that, does anybody have any additional questions regarding transformation and data engineering in Fabric? The one thing too is if you're interested in the roadmap, I know that they made it from the Fabric conference. It was public last week. So I highly recommend finding that on YouTube so that you can take a look at all the new product announcements if that matters to you. So because they did announce a whole bunch of things that are really pretty cool that they're coming out with, including something called data mirroring, which is truly awesome, that allows you to access your data in real time in Power BI, and you don't even have to pay for it. So what is the advantage Fabric gives over Azure Data Factory and what's ADB? So honestly, Databricks. Okay, so Databricks is a Spark that is faster version, and that hasn't changed. What's changed is your ability to integrate data. Microsoft has made it really, really easy. So they've created a new data lake called OneLake that allows you to access data that you might have in AWS or the Google Cloud or Mirror Snowflake, and I'll put it all in one place and then access it inside of the Fabric environment. So if you're just strictly talking data transformation, those tools are both fine and they still work fine. But if you are looking to organize everything in one spot and not have to go fish and write separate code, that's really what benefit that Fabric brings to the table. Because it's really the only thing that's really different in ADF is the fact that it incorporates notebooks better and Dataflow Gen 2, which is not in ADF outside. Is data engineering through Gen 2 method in Fabric the cheapest way? No, the cheapest way is notebooks. But it can be, depending on how much data you're talking about, you may not notice a difference. The most expensive way to transform your data, though, is using a data flow that originated in Azure Data Factory. Those are the most expensive ones. So if you write good Spark code, that's cheapest. You can also write SQL as well. So. Good question. How about cost? So this gets really kind of tricky because Microsoft is moving to, if you use Fabric, they're getting, Power BI doesn't matter, although you're in Power BI, the licensing is kind of separate. They're getting rid of P SKUs altogether, and they're moving to F SKUs, F for Fabric. The minimum, now one thing that is different is they have different consumption models. So if you turn on Fabric, there is an hourly cost, or you can do a monthly cost. And if you do a monthly cost based on a yearly commitment, then it's the cheapest altogether. So if you just, if you turn off your Fabric capacity and when you're not using it, because you do your pipelines and you're done at 8 o'clock, you could save yourself some money that way versus just buying like a block. So in terms of what you need to buy, I think the minimum one is a F8. And an F8 is something like, I think it's $8 an hour. I was just looking at it too. So that's how it's priced. In addition to that, data storage is $26 a terabyte a month, which isn't going to kill anybody. But if you go with the larger F SKUs, yeah, it does get expensive. So, and then of course you get charged for extra things like doing a lot of querying. You get charged for the querying, as well as you get charged for the compute when you're using it in Fabric, and for the compute you're using inside of a pipeline if you use an ADF pipeline. So yeah, complicated. But one thing that they did add, which helps out because this is just kind of ridiculous trying to figure out how much money that you're spending, because of course everybody wants to know that the answer to that question, is if I go to Fabric, they created, which I downloaded, this capacity management metrics. This is a report that they created, and you can see what your costs are in this report. So you can see that this is the capacity that we're talking about, and we can see where what I've done and what kind of costs that I've incurred. And this you download in the app. So if you want to know what it's costing you and what you're using, you can kind of play around with this and figure it out. So this is their answer to how much is this costing me? What am I doing? So you can kind of see what the size is and if I've got any overloaded minutes. I don't not seeing, you know, and I have a trial, so it's kind of messed up, but you can still see the usage this way. So, and this is how they're telling people to monitor. And they've got a lot of information on what this is telling you. And so there's documentation for it as well. And again, I got this from the, this is an app, an organizational app. So I've got it at home somewhere. So definitely check out the Fabric Capacity Metrics app. They also have one for Power BI too, but it's not as complicated. Any other questions? All right. Well, Steve, should probably wrap this up unless someone has any additional questions that they want to ask.
Sure. Ginger, thank you for a great presentation.
You're very welcome, and hope everybody learned something.